Hey everyone, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. Hope you've been doing well out there. So today's video is an important kind of message from the heart from me to you. And I realize that what I'm about to share here might be a little bit kind of challenging or confronting for some of you, but this is a really important, key, crucial thing to understand. And that is we're going to be talking about the importance of not defining our perspective and our worldview, whether that's about ourselves or about our relationships or about life, from a place of reaction and reactivity. This is such a key thing to become aware of in ourselves and to start to track and to start to become clear about. So let's go ahead and talk about it a bit and I'll unpack it for you. Okay, so like I said in the intro here, this is kind of something that's a bit of an off-the-cuff video that's just kind of from my heart. It's kind of on my mind. It's something that I see up in my field a lot recently. This is kind of something I'm seeing, with friends and family members and whatnot. And so I just wanted to speak to it because it's such a common and pervasive problem. And it's a real fucking problem that for most of us works against us and bites us in the ass and is a place where generally we are unconscious and unaware of ourselves and rationalizing and covering it up with all kinds of excuses. But if we dig down into what's driving our choices and driving our logic, often it is this reactivity that ends up being kind of toxic and dangerous and unhealthy and driving us towards some of the worst choices we can make for our lives. So I want to tune you into this because as you start to track this empowers you to become aware of what might be less healthy or less mature logic inside of you, or less mature conclusion or meaning making inside of you. And you can start to track, oh, this is coming from reactivity. This is coming from trying to avoid something or push something away or out of a judgment about something or a heavy disagreement or this kind of a thing. And so this, as you start to track this in yourself, it helps you to start to orient and get clear with, okay, well, if I don't want to be reactionary necessarily in my decision making, what does a more sane, balanced, clear understanding of the situation look like, right? So we can start to evaluate and explore what our choices are outside of the charged kind of drive that usually is at the heart of reaction, right? This is also super relevant, by the way, not only in general, not only with, I would say personal development, general relating and just being a human in life with other people around you in a society. This is also relevant for sure when it comes to spiritual growth. This is relevant when it comes to what ideas you're attracted to and that you welcome in or that you don't welcome in. This is relevant to your biases. This is relevant to, in a big way, psychedelic work. So let me explain how that kind of plays out. A lot of times when we are psychedelic, again, it's a non-specific amplifier and we get all kinds of qualities of responses, emotions, feelings, and thoughts that move through us, some of which are coming from really healthy places in us, some of which are coming from really new places in us, some of which are coming from really old and unhealthy places in us. And this all gets kind of, blended together in various, degrees. And so sometimes the logic and the conclusion making and the insights that come out of us in a psychedelic session can be deeply driven by reaction and really what is unconsciousness. I think it's worth saying that, if we allow that to happen, that can distort kind of the insights that we come out of a psychedelic therapy session with and kind of, distorts our view of, what maybe we need to do next in our life or what we need to do to integrate that or what, it can really kind of warp things if we buy into our own reactivity. Right. And I think this is true in general. If we allow ourselves to be driven by reactivity in our lives, what you'll notice more often than not, I mean, this was certainly true for me, and it's certainly true when I look around at the people in my life that I see who are driven by reaction. Generally speaking, right, reactivity leads to bad decision making. Right? It leads to worse choices, worse outcomes. It leads to impulsive decision making. It leads to, things that are kind of lowest common denominator, options or choices. It leads us to, not considering the full, palette of available options to us. It leads us to kind of enmeshment in unhealthy dynamics where instead of rising beyond the dynamic or moving outside of it, we end up kind of entangled in an unhealthy dynamic with someone because we're in reaction, right? So this is a cue, if you're coming from reactivity, that you're not coming from your prefrontal cortex, your outer layer of your brain, the most logical, rational, updated, clear, fully perceiving, informed version of you. You're coming from more the brain stem, the reptilian brain, maybe the mammalian brain, where it's about logic, or not about logic, it's about emotion, it's about survival, it's about safety, it's about impulsive, immediate life or death decisions. But the truth is that most of the time when we're being reactive, it only feels like we're in that kind of scenario, and rarely is that generally the case, right? There's definitely a time and a place to trust our reactions. There's definitely a time and a place to trust our intuitions. There's definitely a time and a place to where our system's kind of immediate decision making is super safe, super healthy, super appropriate, and the thing that is going to protect us from very fast, immediate life or death situations. But generally speaking, for most of a modern human being's life, that's not the case. That's not the context we're in. And so we have this interesting problem here where reactivity is kind of the most basic form of decision making for most life forms, right? Instinct, immediate action, intuitive felt sense reaction. It's not logical, it's not rational, and it's just meant to get you out of harm's way. And so most of us, that's in all of us. That's how we're wired. That's how we're built evolutionarily. That's the deepest part of us. And so that's what comes online first. That's what rules the deeper, logic of the nervous system from a particular lens. And so as a mammal, we're wired that way. We're just built to be reactive like every other animal, but generally speaking, if we only use that as our faculty of decision making, it ends up not really fitting with the kind of life that we want to experience. It ends up not fitting with being a modern human being in a modern society and modern social systems and modern, complexity, right? It generally doesn't fit with getting the biggest win-win outcome. Sometimes it does, but pretty rarely. It generally doesn't serve us. And so it's super, super important. I hope I'm selling you on the importance of tracking this in ourselves, becoming self-aware about this aspect of ourselves, not buying the fucking hype when our brain wants to be reactive or wants to, make decisions based on pushing something away, and becoming aware that this isn't a mature, updated, conscious, authentic, empowered, agent part of ourselves. This is coming from a deeply enmeshed, unconscious, younger version of ourselves most of the time. So with that being said, I want to kind of explain a bit about the dynamics around reactivity, some of my thoughts around it, including some angles from neurolinguistic programming that I think are useful here, some angles from understanding, developmental psychology, and then we'll kind of wrap the video here. Boy, oh boy, I just looked at how long that context section was of the video. I kind of yammered on there. Sorry about that, guys. But I want to try to get all the different points in. Hopefully this is useful information and not just me being too self-indulgent. So first thing I want to talk about in terms of adding some more understanding to reactivity is understanding the different directions of our motivational system, right? So as far as we understand, there are two directions in which we are motivated. We are either motivated towards what we want, let's say towards pleasure at its most basic, or away from pain at its most basic, right? And both of these can be forms of reactivity at their most simple level, right? At their most primal, unconscious, immediate, like caveman level, or reptilian even level, understanding and functioning. Both of these can be that way, right? We reach for pleasure, we reach for the yummy food, or we push away that which is, dangerous or unsafe or unhealthy for us, right? This is every animal. This is, again, you meet a strange dog walking down the street, and it puts its ears down and it cowers, right? And it wants to like back off away from you, right? That's reactivity, right? It's just immediate. It's just something the nervous system does. But generally speaking, most of us, when you look at the way people who generally aren't doing great, and even sometimes people who are doing great but who aren't authentic, who aren't living their best life or their truest life, or coming from their core higher self, right? Generally speaking, you'll see, or even if you just look at like a younger version of you, the decision making is often totally unconscious and generally speaking reactive. That is, that it's coming from often really from pushing away what we don't want. Right. So this is, situations that felt bad to us or unsafe or that we didn't agree with. This is, ideas and concepts and ways of relating that we don't align with. This is, maybe, people and archetypes in the world that we just kind of like have a bias against, right? That like just kind of qualitatively flavors in life that we don't like that flavor and we're like, and we kind of are repulsed or disgusted or uncomfortable with. This is things we're not ready to address and deal with, obviously, when it comes to emotions and content, psychology. This is aspects of, personal growth that might be challenging or overwhelming. This is, invitations to grow through what is heavy or hard or, takes effort and requirement. Sometimes, again, we start chasing the pleasure principle, which is a form of reaction. We start pushing away that which we don't like, don't agree with, aren't comfortable with, doesn't feel safe, et cetera, et cetera. And if we do this enough, we end up just relying on this process. And so we have these two motivational directions here. I'm going to argue that generally speaking, if you're in alignment with your clearest, highest, truest, most authentic, healthiest, best self, that generally speaking, that is going to be less about away from. It's going to be less about, I need to get away from that. It's going to be more like a toward, like a magnet that you're pulled towards in terms of best decisions for you based on what resonates for you, right? What makes sense, what calls you forth, what's appealing, what's intriguing, what's beautiful, what's feels right, what feels compelling in a really safe, wonderful way. Generally speaking, you'll find that that's closer to healthy decision making. It's generally grounded. It's generally like your conscious mind, your logical, rational mind is online and evaluating things and looking at things, but also you're feeling things, right? You're feeling if this feels like a good decision, but also you're present with it. There's no grasping. There's no pushing away. You're centered. Either way is fine, but the choices you're making are coming from the sense of being fully present in yourself, fully aligned with your values, fully aligned with, your core, what you believe in, fully aligned with, what you feel is your deepest truth. And then the decisions you make are kind of aligned with that. So it's all levels. It's logical, it's emotional, it's felt sense, it's somatic, it's spiritual. And when all of these things line up and you feel centered and you feel kind of compelled and resonant with something, then you make that choice from an empowered place. That's what healthy decision-making looks like. And that's so different from this kind of pushing away, right? And sometimes we can grasp also in a reactive way, right? We can grasp for people that feel safe but are, codependent and maybe not healthy for us. We can, if we feel anxious and insecure, we can grasp for, life experiences that look like and seem like what we want, but then we get them and they're kind of hollow victories. We can grasp, reactively for whatever it is, including psychedelics. Can fit into that for a lot of people. If we're desperate, we're doing psychedelics because we're desperate, and we're grasping for a solution, that can be reactive, right? And so one of the tricks here is, again, in terms of motivational directions, definitely don't look at, what you're pushing away so much as the deciding factor. Although obviously, even when you're centered in yourself, sometimes you're like, yeah, I'm clear. That's not the thing for me. That's not the person for me. That's not the situation I want. I don't want to live in that city, et cetera, right? You can get clarity in a way that there's some away from there, but you're not driven in this intense reactive way by away from. Similarly, there can be this toward there that's not, again, compulsively grasping for something. So you want to start to track this in yourself and look for the toward and away froms and realize that a healthy decision isn't going to be made from this reactive, impulsive, immediate place, but is going to come from this centered wholeness of knowing. There's really a very different feeling, a different experience. And I think one of the signatures of it is that there's a lot more of your conscious mind online than when you're in reactivity mode. So that's a little bit about the different directions of motivation and how that ties into reactivity. So let's pivot here and talk a little bit about abreaction. So in psychology, there is a term for when we have a big reactive experience to something that ends up creating a strong away from for us. And this is what's called abreaction. Now, for a lot of us, a lot of how we've ended up wherever we've ended up in life comes from abreaction to early life experiences, right? So we have some sort of early life experience that is upsetting, disappointing, not enough. We feel disconnected. We feel unsafe. We feel unseen. We feel, threatened, et cetera, and that creates a strong, powerful emotional charge or sense of lack of safety that we create like a big push away from. That's called an abreaction. Now, again, I want to tune you into this so that you start to look at, and this can be kind of a little, for me, this is comfortable now because I've been working this for a long time. But for someone who's new to psychedelics and self-awareness, personal healing, personal growth, this can be unsettling because we start to realize how much of our identity, our sense of self, and our sense of our place in the world and what we lean towards and our preferences and our relationships, et cetera, yada, 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 all over the place, how much of that is based out of our abreactions. How much of that is based out of what we're pushing away, running away from, not willing to deal with, not willing to address, not willing to confront, not willing to acknowledge, et cetera, right? So I want to be fair here that this is very common that we end up letting our abreactions run the show. And so again, I want to tune you into this because if you're doing medicine work, you want to look at these impulses as they arise. You want to tune into where's that coming from in me? What's driving this feeling? What was their initial fear, pain, disconnect, unsafe situation that caused such a big abreaction? And what you'll see across the board, if you look at people in your life and you look at people and you talk to people about their rationale for their decision making or what shaped their life or how they came to be driven to do what they do or how they ended up where they're at, more often than not, some big abreactions are kind of at the floor, at the heart of this. And so it's something that I just, I want to put the word in your consciousness if you're not aware of it and just kind of like lay this concept out there before you that, we have these big abreactions early in life that often very much shape our worldview, our view of ourselves, our view of people, our view of relationships and if they're safe or not, our view of life, our view of money, our view of food and resources, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to be tracking for these in yourself and understanding and really start to make the clarity with yourself that, that the abreaction is not the same thing as the truth. That sometimes that may have been true back then, or that may have been the only way your nervous system knew how to respond to a certain situation, but to start to disentangle your current self from these early reactivities and start to resolve and clean up the charge of the past so it's not driving your decision-making into the future. So let's talk a little bit about abreactions in psychedelic experiences in particular, and then we'll kind of pivot from there. So that's one form of abreaction. And abreaction just generally means, in case I wasn't clear about this before, just having a big, strong, emotional, somatic nervous system reaction to an experience, right? So when something is just like we're like overwhelmed, we're overloaded, we're freaking out, we're totally upset about something, that's what's called an abreaction. And in psychedelic work, this often comes up too as part of kind of maybe traumatic release, traumatic healing, something, certainly with difficult experiences or bad trips where someone gets way in over their head in terms of dose or drug combining or sense setting, something about that not being correct for that person in that moment. And then they're kind of spooked, and then that spook gets amplified and looped into like this kind of downward spiral of feeling really bad and being overwhelmed and having anxiety attacks or panic attacks. Or, in general, maybe you're working with yourself and all of a sudden you discover this kind of traumatic material you didn't realize was there. And then it kind of starts coming up to be released. And there's this big kind of somatic, emotional, mental release that takes over your system, and your body's maybe shaking it out or releasing it or crying it out, or all these memories are flooding back into your system. These are what are also known as abreactions. Now, if you can stay present in these kinds of experiences, they can be valuable and really useful, and I want to be clear that sometimes when we're having a traumatic release, that's not always an abreaction. Sometimes that's just a release. But if we tend to get spooked and reactive and that fight or flight, wanting to act or run away, or if we go more numb and dissociate and that whole thing starts to get triggered, that whole response gets triggered, that's generally what's called an abreaction. Psychedelics can bring up these abreactive states. Obviously, they can be really intense. They can be really overwhelming. And so this is something also to track for in yourself. Generally, if you're in a place where your logical, rational mind, your observer mind is also present, you're coherent, generally it's not going to be a real big issue for you. It's not going to be something that's as likely to come up in a session unless you're specifically going into trauma work. So this is a big reason why, if you're going to use psychedelics for trauma healing, you want to be doing trauma work with a qualified trauma specialist, a qualified trauma therapist, and you want to be doing that work sober, and ideally having some sense of how your body responds to activations when you're sober, and learning what it feels like to ride out these releases, so that if you have a big abreaction on the medicine, again, you're already like familiar with what this is, how this works, how to work with your body when it's in this kind of state, and you're not letting it kind of take you into overwhelm and total shutdown. So I hope that makes sense. So yes, abreactions are part of our early formative life experiences often, and can shape us in ways where we, again, get reactive at a really deep level, and that forms our view of the world. But abreactions are also something that can come up and resurface or be triggered in these more primal states that psychedelics can tend to elicit. So I hope that's clear. So kind of zooming back out and circling back around to just general reactivity, I want to start to kind of highlight a point that I already made in this video, but just make it more explicit, make it more obvious in case it isn't. And this is really what's driving me to make this video in general, which is it's super important for all of us to understand that, generally speaking, when we are making decisions from reactions, we are making bad decisions. That generally speaking, reactivity is going to work against us more than it's going to work for us, and that this is something to be watching for in ourselves and tending to, and not allowing to run the show. This is so, so important. And it's super common that I see people, whether, again, it's in session with clients, whether it's, just abroad in the world, whether it's on social media, whether it's content being made, over and over and over, I see people rationalizing their reactivity and kind of making excuses for reactive decision making without really taking ownership of the truth, which is that reactive decision making, more often than not, steers us in the wrong direction, bites us in the ass, costs us more than it gives us, and can be very destructive. And I think it's super important to recognize that, to tune into that, and to become aware of our own reactivity. And that part of, I think, becoming, let's say, an adult, a mature human being, a healthy, actualized human being, certainly a centered, spiritually aligned human being, involves not making decisions or behaviors or choices, whether those are short term or, long term, especially from this place of reaction. It's so, so important. And it's something that I've seen ruin a lot of lives, including my own. And so I just want to put this message out there to all of you to really, track this in yourself, to become aware of this, to not make excuses for it, to understand that when you're being reactive, that's not serving you the vast majority of the time. And certainly in a psychedelic session, this becomes amplified, just like everything else does. So just want to kind of highlight that point. This is not a good way to live your life, like quite simply. Okay, so let's speak to a moment about why it's such a bad life strategy. Why is reactivity bad? Why is it not wise? Why should you track this in yourself? Why should you stop being reactive as a way of making decisions if that's how you've run your life up to this point? Let me try to explain this to you. The basic, answer to this is that when we're reactive, we are not fully present. We're not using all the information available to us in a given moment. When we're reactive, generally speaking, we boil everything down, we oversimplify, we filter out most of the information available to us to make it a clear decision down to safe, not safe, pleasure, not pleasure, good, bad, right, wrong, yes, no, very, polarized, binary kind of decision making. And it's like, reach towards that, grab that, push that away, this kind of a thing. So it's really very distorted understandings of life. The other problem there is that you can't really discover what's really holistically meaningful for you, profoundly beautiful, deeply rewarding. What's the best, not even what's better, what's the best option? What's the best life can offer you? How good can things fucking get when you're in reaction? Generally, when you're in reaction, you're filtering out all of that stuff that might take longer, arcs of time, that might take more effort, that might be like a deeper, more nuanced understanding of yourself or understanding of others or understanding of the world around you. You're filtering all of that out. And so if you run your life inside of that habit, inside of that filter of reactivity as the way you make your decisions, you're costing yourself the ability to get truly self-aware, truly self-connected, and make decisions that account for all of the rich, nuanced, multi-layered complexity of who you are and nourish and meet you at all those levels, right? So we kind of sacrifice what would be a more rewarding, more fulfilling, like truly, gorgeous life in order to have, the quick answer, basically. And that's the real problem here. So let me just kind of summarize this a little bit and we will call it good. So again, reactivity is generally speaking something we all do. It's kind of a deeper level of the brain. It's kind of built in all of us. And this can take many forms in life. Generally speaking, we have kind of things we're motivated away from, things we're motivated towards. Both can be forms of, what drive reactivity. Generally speaking, we want to be moving out of that and into a holistic understanding of ourselves and the situation that allows us to be fully present, where we're making decisions from our wholeness and not from just some part of us that's kind of thinking in binary terms about good, bad, right, wrong, safe, not safe. Generally, we want to be accounting for and healing and recognizing the way our early abreactions to our early life situations might be coloring or distorting or driving our current perception of ourself or of others or of life or of relationships, and how that shapes the decision making that we are, making. We also want to be accounting for looking at when we're doing healing work, am I pushing myself into a zone where I might have a big abreaction here? Am I pushing myself past my comfort zone and into overwhelm where my nervous system might have a big abreaction? Part of trauma work sometimes involves, kind of riding that line and helping stuff to release. So that's something to know about yourself and be tracking and be self-aware of. Other things I want you to know, again, is that when we're reactive, we are generally not getting, we're not getting in touch with who we are now and what we value now and the wholeness of who we are. We're not making decisions that are, nuanced and multi-layered and rich and deep and really meet our values. Instead, we're kind of operating on a much more primitive level of our brain. Generally, you'll notice again that reactivity turns into bad life decisions for yourself and for those around you. So start to track this and just, my encouragement to you, because I care, start to make better decisions that aren't coming from reactions. Much love to you all. Thanks for watching if you made it this far. I hope this serves you, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.